To begin with creating the keyword framework, let's say we have three test cases for our project. The first one is create order, second is update order, and third is delete order. These test cases you must have been come across earlier in our functional decomposition framework. Now we'll be creating the flow in a similar way, in a similar fashion, but there's some difference between functional decomposition and keyword driven framework. So you'll get to know once you start creating the framework for the same. Now to begin with, this structure, this test case structure you had already seen in functional decomposition framework, wherein for the three test cases we'll break down the test case into different functionalities. So as you can see, for create order I've broken my functionality, the test case, into login functionality, create order functionality, and then logout. Similarly for update order and as well as for delete order, I've broken down the test cases on the basis of the functionality. Now these functionality will be reused in my different test cases based on the requirement. Okay, so this is my initial structure. Now the additional part which you won't see in functional decomposition, that is, we'll be adding the keyword. Now every functionality will have its own keyword, and if the functionality is repeating in the same test case or in some other test case, the keywords will also be repeating. For example, logout, you can see it's in all the three test cases, and therefore the keywords are also repeating. Now just for the sake of understanding, I'm just keeping the keyword almost, I'm removing the space, since keyword is a single word, and keeping the name almost same as the functionality name so that there is no confusion. Okay, so now this is the initial structure. I have broken down my test cases into different functionality, and I've assigned a keyword for each and every functionality. Now let's say my project for now has only three test cases, and going forward maybe we'll be adding more test cases as the application keeps on developing. We'll get more number of test cases. So this is just a simple example. There can be 30 test cases instead of 3 test cases. So this is just for your sake of understanding, and the test cases can keep on adding, coming up as and when there's new build or as and when the application is getting developed. So starting with the initial 3 test cases, what we'll do is, once we have identified the functionality, we'll creating individual scripts for the individual functionality, and we'll be putting all this in our function library. Okay, now this is my function library. Okay, what I'll do is, you know that you have to go to file and go to new function library, and you have to create your new function library. Now I'm skipping the coding part because it will be covered further in your VB script coding. For now we just need to understand how the framework works, the flow of the framework, which is very important, since it is the skeleton of it will be the skeleton of the project which you will be working on. So as I said, once you break down your functionality, you have to create script for each of the functionality, and you have to save it in your function library. Now as you can see, my login functionality, I've created a function with the name fn login. Okay, and there will be a script in between which I have not added. Similarly for logout, create order, search order, update order, and delete order. So as you can see, I have all of the functionalities in my 3 test cases. Now one difference you'll note between functional decomposition and keyword framework is, for functional decomposition, the functionalities which didn't repeat in different test cases, we kept them in our test case. That is, we didn't create functions for them. For example, create order is only present in create order test case. It is not appearing in any of the test cases. So what I did was, I called the login function, then I wrote the code for create order in my test case, and then I called logout function. So I had only login and logout function, whereas create order was written in my action, the action which has create order test case. So suppose I go to a new test, this is my action, I will call the function login. Okay, I have called fn login. So this is how I call my function. Then I wrote a code for create order. Okay, after that I called function logout. So as you can see in my functional decomposition, what I did is, First of all, I broke my test case into different functionalities: login, create order, and logout. And each of my test will represent an individual test case. Now suppose this test case is create order and this test represents create order. So it will have login, the code for create order, and logout. Now since login and logout are repeating in the other test cases as well, I am storing it in my function library, and I am calling it again and again. So the advantage of functional decomposition was that I don't have to write login and logout script again and again for each and every test case. I just need to call the function whenever I needed it. Whereas I wrote the code in the test for create order because I didn't keep it in a function, because create order is not being used again and again. It just appeared in create order test case, and that's why I'm keeping it separately. Now one difference you will note about the new framework, that is keyword framework, which we are seeing, is you are creating function for each and every functionality. Whether it is repeating or not doesn't matter. We'll be creating and we'll also be calling. Okay, so this is create order, and I'll be putting the create order code in the function, and I'll be calling whenever I need. Now one thing that will come in your mind is, suppose this is my test case for create order. I've put everything in my function library. I'll associate this function library with my test. Okay, and once I've associated, these functions will be available for my test. So whenever I call these functions, they will be executing. Then you'll think, then what is the use of this keyword in my keyword driven framework? When I have everything ready, when I know what are the functionalities I can just directly call from my test, then why do I need keyword for that? So we'll come to it. What is the purpose of keyword in keyword driven framework? Now as you know, the name itself is keyword driven framework, so keyword obviously has a very important role to play. Now at this stage you will note that you have only two things ready with you. The first is the Excel sheet, which is having the test case functionality and the keywords associated with them. The second is the function libraries, the functions which represent the different keywords which you had created. Okay, and we have put it in the function library. Now, once these two processes are over, the third process is to create a generic function which will read the keyword. Now here comes the role of keywords. Now the generic function will read the keywords and execute the functionality. That is, suppose it encounters login keyword, this function has to execute this functionality, and then once it is executed, it will go back, and then again it will read out some other keyword, and then it will execute the functionality corresponding to that keyword. Now let's see how this action is achieved through a function. Now I have saved this function in a separate function library, that is keyword generic function. Okay, since it's a generic function and it's not related to any of the test case, I have saved it in a separate function library. You can also save it in your function library which has all the functionalities, but you can do that, there's no problem with that. But what I've done, for the sake of more discretion, I've saved it in a different function library which I call it as keyword underscore generic function. And what this function does is, if you see, there's a parameter as tc name. Now this variable is passed in the function, and what this variable does is, it takes the test case name, it will add the data table. Okay, it will add a new data sheet to your data table. The name of that sheet is dt tc flow. Once that is done, it will import this Excel sheet. It will import this sheet into your runtime data table in dt tc flow. Okay, so suppose this sample sheet name is test case flow sheet. Okay, let's say I name it sample. Okay, so SXL location will have the location where the sample sheet is saved, and it will pull this sheet into the runtime sheet which we had created, that is dt test case flow. So why do I need it in my runtime data table? Because I want to perform certain operation on this sheet. That is, I need to pull the keywords into the script which will be used to identify the functionality which needs to be executed. Now the next step is, once I have pulled it into my runtime data table, I will take the count of the row. So in my case, the count will be from the row number 1 to row number 12. Okay, so once that is done, I will take the keyword one by one.